I sold the house, and with it, my sick wife, who was bedridden. I didn't care. I just wanted to start over. But days later, I came back to pick up some documents. And when I saw what the new tenant had done to her, "Sign here, Mr. Thornton. One signature and it's all over." The real estate agent's Mont Blanc pen gleamed under the fluorescent lights of her office. Sandra Chen, with her perfect blazer and practiced smile, pushed the final contract across her polished desk. I stared at the dotted line, my hand hovering. One signature to erase 15 years of marriage, one scrawl of ink to free myself from the prison my life had become, one moment of betrayal that would define me forever. I signed. "Congratulations," Sandra said, the word hollow in the quiet room. "The sale is complete. Mr. Reeves will take possession tomorrow morning at 9. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The 240 zero cashier's check sat in my jacket pocket, pressing against my chest like a stone. The weight of it should have felt like liberation. Instead, it felt like 30 pieces of silver. "I need to remind you," Sandra continued, her voice shifting into the careful tone people use when discussing unpleasant matters, "that as per our unusual arrangement, all of Mrs. Thornton's medical equipment remains with the property. Mr. Reeves has signed all the care transfer paperwork, and your power of attorney documents have been properly filed with the court." "I understand." My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. In a way, it did. The Jack Thornton who had stood at an altar and promised to love Catherine in sickness and in health no longer existed. That man had died slowly over 4 years of catheters and feeding tubes, of insurance battles and bankruptcy notices, of watching his vibrant, brilliant wife disappear into a shell of herself. Mr. Reeves has excellent references. Sandra offered, mistaking my silence for concern. His nursing license is current, and he's handled 3 similar arrangements before. Your wife will receive proper care. Care. Such a small word for the all-consuming burden that had crushed me. The midnight medication alarms, the bed sores that never quite healed, the adult diapers. The specialized foods that insurance wouldn't cover. The look in Catherine's eyes, sometimes lucid, sometimes not that, screamed the question I couldn't answer. Why is this happening to me? "I know," I said, standing up. "I've done my research." It wasn't entirely a lie. I had researched Nathan Reeves, a registered nurse who had come into a substantial inheritance and now purchased homes with care-dependent residents included. A man who believed people deserved to age or convalesce in their own spaces rather than institutions. His references were impeccable. His previous arrangements had resulted in satisfied families and well-cared for patients. But I hadn't researched how to live with myself afterward. "We're all set then." Sandra stood and extended her hand. She'd handled the entire transaction with clinical efficiency, never once letting her professional mask slip to reveal what she must have thought of me, a monster abandoning his sick wife, selling her like furniture, along with the 4-bedroom colonial we'd once called our dream home. I shook her hand and walked out, the spring sunshine mocking the winter in my soul. In the parking lot, I sat in my car, the only thing of value I'd kept besides my clothes and laptop hand, stared at the dashboard. The cracked leather steering wheel was smooth from years of my grip, worn thin in the spots where my fingers had clutched it during frantic midnight drives to the emergency room when Catherine's breathing grew labored or her pain spiraled beyond what her home medication could touch. My phone buzzed. Dr. Melton, Catherine's neurologist. I let it ring through to voicemail, then listened to his message. "Jack, I need to speak with you urgently about Catherine's latest test results. Her condition is showing significant deterioration, and we need to discuss adjusting her treatment plan immediately. Please call my office as soon as possible." I deleted the message. By tomorrow, it would be Nathan Reeves' problem. The thought brought a wave of shame so intense I had to lean forward, pressing my forehead against the steering wheel to keep from vomiting. What kind of man had I become? The motel room I'd rented across town was depressing in its anonymity. Beige walls, scratchy polyester bedspread, a TV that got 23 channels of nothing worth watching. I'd paid cash for a week in advance, using a tiny fraction of the money I'd received for selling my soul. 2 suitcases sat by the particle board dresser. One contained clothes just enough to get me to Phoenix, where an old college friend had offered me a place to stay until I found my feet. The other held my laptop, toiletries, and a single-framed photograph. Catherine in a red sundress, laughing on a beach in Maui during our 10th anniversary trip, before the first symptoms had appeared. Before the diagnosis that sounded like a death sentence, multiple sclerosis, aggressive progression. I didn't take our wedding album. I couldn't bear to look at those vows, spoken with such certainty by 2 people who had no idea what lay ahead. The letter I'd left for Catherine sat in the bedside drawer of our Hamino, Nathan Reeves' home now. I'd written it, rewritten it, torn it up, and started again a dozen times before settling on 5 inadequate paragraphs explaining that I'd arranged for her care, that I would send money regularly for anything she needed beyond what Nathan would provide, that I was sorry. Sorry. Such a pathetic word for what I was doing. I hadn't said goodbye to her face. I'd waited until her afternoon dose of pain medication had taken effect, leaving her in that heavy, dreamless sleep that was her only real respite. I'd straightened her pillows, checked her feeding tube, and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Then I'd placed the letter on her bedside table and walked out without looking back, knowing that if I did, I might not have the strength to leave. Now, sitting on the edge of the sagging motel bed, I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank account. The $240 from the house sale showed as a pending deposit. After I paid off the second mortgage I'd taken out for Catherine's treatments, the credit cards I'd maxed out on medical equipment, and the personal loans from the few friends who'd still been willing to help, I'd have about $87,000 left. Enough to start over somewhere. Enough to pretend I was still a good man. My phone buzzed again. Emma Larson, Catherine's home health aide. I silenced it without answering. Emma came 3 times a week to bathe Catherine and help with physical therapy. She'd be arriving at the house tomorrow morning to find not me, but Nathan Reeves. I'd left her final paycheck on the kitchen counter with a note explaining the change. Another cowardly goodbye. I opened the bottom drawer of the nightstand and pulled out the bottle of whiskey I'd bought on the way to the motel. No glass I drank straight from the bottle, welcoming the burn as it traveled down my throat. I drank until the edges of my guilt blurred, until I could almost believe the story I'd been telling myself, that this was an act of mercy for both of us, that Catherine would receive better care from a professional, that I'd been dragging us both down by trying to be her husband and her nurse when I was qualified to be neither. The truth, of course, was simpler and more damning. I had broken. After 4 years of watching my wife's body betray her, after losing our savings, our social circle, our future plans, after countless nights sleeping in a chair beside her bed because she'd wake panicking if I wasn't there, after bathing her and changing her and feeding her and still seeing no gratitude in her eyes because the medication kept her too foggy to recognize the sacrifice after all that, I had finally accepted the ugly truth about myself. I was not strong enough. I was not good enough. I was not the man I'd thought I was. The whiskey bottle was half empty when I finally fell back onto the bed, still fully clothed, and passed into the oblivion I craved. Morning came with a headache that felt like penance. I lay on the motel bed, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight filtering through the cheap curtains, and tried not to think about what was happening at my house. Nathan Reeves would be moving in, Catherine would be waking to find my letter instead of my face, Emma would be arriving to find her world upended. My phone showed 17 missed calls, Dr. Melton, Emma, my brother Dan, Catherine's cousin Beth. I turned it off and shoved it in my dresser drawer. I couldn't face any of them, couldn't bear their questions or, worse, their judgment. No one could possibly judge me more harshly than I was judging myself. I spent 3 days in that motel room, leaving only to buy fast food and more whiskey. I didn't shower, I didn't shave. I existed in a haze of self-loathing and alcohol, playing out alternative scenarios in my mind. What if I'd been stronger? What if we'd had better insurance? What if Catherine's parents were still alive, or my family had money, or any of the 1,000 other circumstances that might have prevented me from becoming the kind of man who would abandon his sick wife? On the 4th day, I forced myself to shower, to shave, to put on clean clothes and face what came next. I booked a flight to Phoenix for the following morning. I called my friend Mike, confirmed I could crash on his couch, spun some story about needing a fresh start after a divorce. Not technically a lie, though the truth was far uglier than any fiction I could create. But before I could leave town, there was something I needed. My passport and birth certificate were in our home safe, hidden in the closet of the guest bedroom. I'd forgotten them in my hurry to escape. Without them, starting over would be harder. I'd need those documents to get a new job, to rent an apartment, to establish myself in Arizona. So I found myself driving back to the house that wasn't mine anymore, planning to slip in when Nathan Reeves might be busy with Catherine or running errands. I still had my key. I'd forgotten to leave it with Sandra, or include it in the stash of household items I'd left on the kitchen counter for Nathan. It was just past noon when I parked a block away and walked up the street I'd lived on for over a decade, feeling like a stranger, like a thief. The neighborhood was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Abernathy next door, who used to bring over her famous lemon bars when Catherine was first diagnosed, wasn't in her garden for once. The Sullivan kids across the street weren't playing basketball in their driveway. It was as if the world had conspired to make my shameful return as inconspicuous as possible. I let myself in through the side door, the one that led into the kitchen. The house smelled different already, cleaner somehow, with notes of lemon and pine that reminded me of a hospital. But there was something else too. Scent of cooking spices I didn't recognize, something warm and inviting that made my stomach growl despite myself. The kitchen had been rearranged, nothing dramatic, but noticeable to someone who had lived there for years. The coffee maker had moved to a different counter. A new spice rack stood where Catherine's collection of cookbooks had once been cookbooks I'd kept, even after she could no longer cook, because getting rid of them felt too much like admitting she never would again. I moved silently through the kitchen toward the stairs, passing the living room on my way. New furniture had appeared, a hospital-grade lift chair positioned perfectly to see both the television and the large bay window that looked out onto the front yard. Catherine's medical equipment had been rearranged, consolidated into an efficient system that somehow looked less intrusive than the chaotic spread I'd lived with. How had Nathan accomplished so much in just 4 days? I was halfway to the stairs when I heard voices from the sunroom, Catherine's favorite place before she'd become bedridden. Her voice, weak but unmistakable, followed by a man's gentle laugh. I froze, then moved toward the sound, stepping carefully to avoid the creaky floorboard near the sunroom door. Through the crack, I could see into the bright space I'd once filled with plants. Catherine loved plants that had died one by one as I'd forgotten to water them, too overwhelmed with her care to tend to living things that weren't her. The plants were back not many, but a few small pots of what looked like herbs on the windowsill. And there, in the center of the room, was Catherine. She was in her wheelchair, the one she hadn't used in over a year because transferring her from bed had become too difficult for me alone. Her hair was washed and styled, falling around her shoulders the way she used to wear it before illness had made such vanities seem pointless. She was dressed in real clothisa, soft blue sweater and loose pants knot, the medical gowns I'd resigned her to for ease of care. And most shocking of all, she was smiling, actually smiling at the man sitting across from her. Nathan Reeves was younger than I'd pictured, maybe early 40s, with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his head and the solid build of someone who regularly lifted patients. He was arranging something on a small table between them, what looked like a physical therapy exercise involving small wooden blocks. "That's 5 more than yesterday," he was saying, his voice warm with approval. "The consistency is what matters, Catherine. Small gains add up." "It hurts," she said, but she was still trying, her fingers trembling as they reached for another block. "I know. But remember what Dr. Liu said about the new treatment protocol. There's reason for optimism." "Dr. Liu? I didn't know any Dr. Liu. Had Nathan found her a new specialist in just 4 days?" "I never thought I'd be back in this room," Catherine said softly, looking around the sunroom. When he left me up there in that bed for months." My heart constricted painfully. I'd thought I was doing what was best for her, keeping her in our bedroom where she had a view of the backyard oak tree she loved. Had I been wrong about that too? "Medical depression is common among caregivers," Nathan said diplomatically. "Your husband made poor choices, but he did arrange for your care before he left." Catherine made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Is that what we're calling it? Arranging for my care? He sold me like furniture, Nathan. Like a burden he could pass on to someone else." Her words hit me like physical blows. Sold her like furniture, a burden. Was that how she saw it? How everyone saw it? "Yes." A voice inside me answered. "That's exactly what you did." The meditation exercises Dr. Liu suggested might help with processing these feelings, Nathan was saying. "Anger is a natural response to abandonment, but holding on to it will only." I must have shifted my weight because the floorboard beneath me creaked loudly. Both Catherine and Nathan looked up toward the door. For a moment, no one moved. Then Nathan stood, positioning himself protectively between Catherine and the door. "Hello?" he called. "Is someone there?" I could have run, could have slipped out the way I came in, forgotten the documents, fled to Phoenix with nothing but the clothes on my back and the shame in my heart. It would have been the coward's choice, but hadn't I already proven myself a coward of the highest order? Instead, I pushed the door open fully and stepped into the sunroom. Catherine's eyes widened. The wooden block she'd been holding clattered to the table. "Jack?" Nathan's posture shifted, subtly still protective, but less alarmed as he recognized me. "Mr. Thornton, this is unexpected." Was it? Or had some part of him been waiting for this moment, for the husband who had abandoned his wife to come crawling back? My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I forgot some documents. In the safe. I was going to slip in and out without disturbing anyone." "Like a thief," Catherine said, her voice hardening. "How appropriate." Nathan glanced between us. "Perhaps I should give you two a moment." "No," Catherine and I said simultaneously. She continued, "Anything he has to say to me, he can say in front of you, Nathan. You're the one who's been here, after all." The accusation hung in the air between us. Nathan nodded once. "As you wish. But remember your blood pressure, Catherine. Dr. Liu was very specific about managing stress." He moved a few steps back. giving us the illusion of privacy while remaining close enough to intervene if Catherine became distressed or if I proved to be a threat. The thought that he might see me as potentially dangerous to my own wife sent another wave of shame through me. "You look." I struggled to find the words. "You look better." Catherine's laugh was bitter. Amazing what proper care can do in just 4 days, isn't it? What did you expect to find, Jack? A corpse? Would that have made it easier for you to live with what you've done? That's not. Did you even read my letter? She interrupted. The one I asked Emma to help me write 6 months ago, when you were sleeping on that chair. She gestured to a worn armchair in the corner of the sunroom. The one where I begged you to consider a care facility because I could see what looking after me was doing to you. The one where I gave you permission to live your own life, to find happiness again? I stared at her, uncomprehending. What letter? Catherine's expression shifted, surprise momentarily replacing anger. You never found it? I had Emma put it in your sock drawer. I shook my head slowly. I never saw any letter. It doesn't matter now, she said, composure returning. You found your own solution, didn't you? Not a care facility where you could visit regularly, not a home health aide who could take on more hours. No, you found a stranger willing to buy your house and your inconvenient wife along with it. Each word was precise, cutting. This wasn't the foggy, medicated Catherine I'd left behind. This was my wife sharp, articulate, seeing through my excuses before I could even make them. The medical bills, I said weakly. The second mortgage. The credit cards. We were drowning, Kat. So you threw me overboard to save yourself. She held my gaze, unflinching. Tell me, Jack, did you even try to find another solution before you decided to abandon me? Did you call my cousin Beth, who offered to help financially? Did you contact the MS Society about their caregiver support programs? Did you talk to Dr. Melton about clinical trials that might have reduced our costs? Or did you just decide one day that 15 years of marriage wasn't worth the struggle anymore? I had no answer, at least, none that wouldn't condemn me further. The truth was, I hadn't done any of those things. I'd been too exhausted, too lost in my own despair to reach out, to keep fighting. It had been easier to surrender, to convince myself there were no other options. I couldn't do it anymore, I said finally, the admission scraping my throat. I wasn't strong enough, Kat. I failed you. I know that. But I thought I convinced myself that you'd be better off with professional care, with someone who knew what they were doing. And you're right, Nathan interjected quietly. Catherine does benefit from professional care, but that's not really the issue, is it? I looked at him, this stranger who now lived in my house, who now cared for my wife, who seemed to understand the situation with a clarity I had never managed. The issue, Catherine said, is that you didn't talk to me. You didn't give me a choice. You decided for both of us, and then you snuck away while I was drugged into oblivion. That's not what partners do, Jack. That's not what love looks like. Love. I repeated the word like a foreign concept. I did love you, Kat. I still. Don't. She held up a hand, stopping me. Don't say it. You don't get to claim love after what you've done. Nathan moved closer to Catherine, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. Your pulse is elevated. Remember your breathing exercises. She nodded, closing her eyes briefly and taking several deep breaths. I watched, fascinated and ashamed. This was a technique I should have known, should have helped her practice. Just one more failure to add to my growing list. Your documents are at First National, Nathan said to me, in a safety deposit box under your name. The real estate agent arranged it as part of the property transfer. Right. Sandra had mentioned something about that in an email I hadn't bothered to read fully. I'll go there instead, then. I turned to leave, eager to escape Catherine's accusing eyes, the evidence of all I had failed to do for her. Wait. Her voice stopped me at the door. You don't get to walk away again without hearing everything I have to say. I turned back slowly, dreading what might come next, but knowing I deserved whatever condemnation she had for me. Nathan, Catherine said, could you give us a few minutes? Actual privacy this time? He hesitated. Are you sure? I'm sure. Her voice was steady. I'll use the call button if I need you. Nathan looked at me, his expression making it clear what would happen if I upset her. I'll be just outside. As he left, closing the door behind him, silence filled the sunroom. Catherine wheeled herself closer to where I stood, stopping about 5 feet away. Tell me why, Jack, she said quietly. Not the excuses about money or exhaustion. The real reason I deserve that much. The real reason. Could I admit it, even to myself? I was afraid, I said finally, the words emerging as barely more than a whisper. Not of the work or the money, though those things were crushing me. I was afraid of watching you disappear. Every day there was less of the woman I married and more of this, stranger who needed me but didn't know me, whose eyes would look through me instead of at me. Who would scream in pain or confusion and not recognize that I was trying to help? I sank into a chair, not the one Nathan had occupied, but one further away, respecting the distance Catherine had established. The doctors kept saying it would get worse, that the cognitive decline would accelerate along with the physical symptoms. That eventually you might not recognize me at all. I looked up at her, tears blurring my vision. I was selfish, Kat. I couldn't bear the thought of being forgotten by you while still having to care for you, of being a stranger to the woman I've loved since college. Catherine's expression softened almost imperceptibly. So you decided to become a stranger to me on your own terms. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. Put that way, my choice seemed even more selfish, more cowardly. Did you know, she said, her voice taking on an educational tone I remembered from her days as a high school English teacher, that MS-related cognitive decline is often exacerbated by medication? That the brain fog I experienced was likely made worse by the cocktail of drugs Dr. Melton had me on? I stared at her, uncomprehending. What? Nathan reviewed my medication regimen immediately. He has experience with MS patients. He consulted with Dr. Lou, a neurologist who specializes in MSAN. They've already adjusted my medications significantly. She gestured to herself. This clarity you're seeing? This isn't a miracle, Jack. It's proper medical care. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Had Catherine been over-medicated? Had Dr. Melton's treatment been making her worse instead of better? But Dr. Melton is one of the top neurologists in the state, I protested. His treatment plans are supposed to be cutting edge. His treatment plans are aggressive and one size fits all, Catherine countered. Dr. Lou believes I've been on too high a dosage of several medications for at least a year, possibly longer. The cognitive symptoms you were so afraid of, they might have been at least partially iatrogenic. Iatrogenic? Caused by medical treatment. She gave me a shadow of her old teacher's smile, the one that gently mocked my ignorance while educating me. That's another thing Nathan has done for me, explained my condition in terms I can understand, involved me in decisions about my own care. He doesn't just do things to me, Jack. He works with me. Each word was another indictment of my failures. I hadn't questioned Dr. Melton's treatment plan. I hadn't researched alternatives. I hadn't involved Catherine in her own care decisions, telling myself she wasn't capable of understanding that I was protecting her from difficult truths. I didn't know, I said lamely. You didn't try to know, she corrected. There's a difference. She was right, of course. I'd surrendered to despair rather than continuing to fight for her, for us. I'd convinced myself there were no other options, because facing the alternatives would have required strength I didn't think I had. I've made a terrible mistake, I admitted. The worst mistake of my life. Catherine studied me, her expression unreadable. Yes, you have? Is there? I hesitated, barely able to form the question. Is there any way I could make it right? She laughed, the sound sharp and without humor. Make it right? You sold our homie home without my knowledge or consent. You transferred my care to a complete stranger while I was unconscious. You walked away from 15 years of marriage without even saying goodbye to my face. Some things can't be made right, Jack. I nodded, accepting the finality in her voice. What had I expected? Forgiveness? A second chance? I deserved neither. I understand, I said, standing up. I'll go. I'm sorry, Catherine. Not that it matters, but I am truly, deeply sorry. As I turned to leave, she spoke again, her voice softer. He's a good man, you know, Nathan. He's been kind to me, respectful. He sees me as a person, not just a patient. I'm glad, I said, meaning it despite the jealousy that twisted in my gut. You deserve that. Yes, I do. She paused. He told me something else, Jack, about the sale. I looked back at her, wary. He said you left almost everything here. My books, my clothes, my collection of sea glass from our trip to Maine, the family photos, even your vinyl records that you've had since college. Her gaze was penetrating. That's not what someone does when they're just being selfish. That's what someone does when they're broken beyond repair. A tear escaped before I could stop it. I don't deserve your understanding. No, you don't, she agreed readily. What you did was cruel and cowardly in ways I'm still trying to process, but I've had 4 days to think about the years before that. You were my caregiver, my nurse, my advocate, my husband, carrying all of it alone for so long. She wheeled herself a little closer. I'm not forgiving you. I don't know if I ever can, but I think I understand what happened to you, to us. The door opened, and Nathan entered with a small tray holding medication and a glass of water. He set it down on the table beside Catherine, his movements efficient but gentle. It's time for your anti-inflammatory, he said. And Dr. Liu called. She wants to adjust your evening dose of the muscle relaxant. Did she say why? Catherine asked, and I was struck by the normality of the exchange. She wasn't just passively accepting medication, she was engaging with her treatment. She reviewed your latest blood work. Your liver enzymes are slightly elevated, so she wants to reduce the dosage as a precaution. Nathan glanced at me, then back to Catherine. Should I come back in a few minutes? No, it's fine. Catherine took the pill he offered and swallowed it with a sip of water. Jack was just leaving. I nodded, accepting the dismissal. Goodbye, Catherine. As I reached the door, her voice stopped me one last time. Jack? I turned. What will you do now? I hadn't expected the question. I have a flight to Phoenix tomorrow, a fresh start. Running away, she translated. Yes, I admitted. That's what I'm good at, apparently. Catherine shook her head slightly. The man I married wasn't a coward. He got lost somewhere along the way, but I don't think he's gone completely. Her words hung in the air between us. I didn't know what to say. Nathan is hiring a part-time physical therapist for me. She continued, changing the subject. Dr. Liu thinks I might regain some function with the right therapy program. Not walking, probably, but more upper body control, more independence. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely happy for her, even as shame washed over me anew. Had I given up on her potential recovery too easily? It won't be easy, she cautioned. Mass doesn't just go away, but there are possibilities I didn't know existed a week ago. Nathan, who had been quietly arranging her medication tray, spoke up. Catherine is a fighter. The progress she's made in just 4 days is remarkable. The pride in his voice was evident. He believed in her in a way I had stopped believing long ago. I should go, I said again, unable to bear the contrast between his competent care and my abject failure. Wait. Catherine's voice was softer now. Are you really going to Phoenix? I nodded. I have a friend there. Somewhere to stay until I find a job. She was quiet for a moment, then said, Don't. Don't? Don't run away to Phoenix, she clarified. Don't disappear. You owe me that much at least. My heart beat faster. What are you asking me to do, Kat? She looked at me steadily. I'm asking you to stay in town, to visit regularly, to face what you've done instead of running from it. Why would you want that? I asked, genuinely confused. Why would you want to see me after what I've done to you? Because, despite everything, you're still my husband, she said simply. And because I need to understand what happened to us if I'm ever going to make peace with it. Nathan cleared his throat. I should mention that the property sale included visitation rights for Mr. Thornton. It's in the contract. He's allowed to visit you, Catherine, as long as both you and I agree to the timing. I stared at him, then back at Catherine. I didn't know that. Did you read the contract before you signed it? Catherine asked, a hint of her old sharpness returning. I hadn't. Not fully. I'd skimmed the pages Sandra had flagged for signatures, too overwhelmed and ashamed to engage with the details. I'll stay, I said, the decision forming even as I spoke the words. I'll cancel the flight. I'll find a place here in town. A look passed over Catherine's face, not happiness, not relief, but something like the first small clearing in a sky that had been dark for too long. Nathan makes dinner at 6, she said. You could come tomorrow. We could talk more. Nathan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I'll be here, I promised. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I meant what I said. I walked out of the house that was no longer mine, carrying none of the documents I'd come for, but something else. Entirely the faintest glimmer of a chance to face my failures, to make what amends I could, but to find a path forward that included honesty instead of escape. In my car, I looked back at the house. Through the window, I could see Nathan helping Catherine back to her therapy exercise. Her face was set in concentration, determined. She had found her strength again, not because I had left, but despite it. I started the engine, not driving toward the motel or the airport, but toward the first step of whatever came next. I didn't deserve this chance, but Catherine deserved my effort at the very least. The road ahead would be harder in many ways than the caregiver role I'd abandoned. It would require facing my shame daily, earning back trust incrementally if at all, witnessing Catherine's progress under someone else's care and knowing it might have happened under mine if I'd been stronger, better, more persistent. But for the first time in years, I felt something like hope-a-not, the easy kind that promises happy endings, but the harder kind that demands work, truth, and courage. It wasn't much. It wasn't nearly enough to balance the scales of what I'd done. But it was a beginning, the beginning of whatever comes after the worst mistake of your life. I drove away from the house, but not from my responsibility. Not this time. If this story is touching your heart, please remember to like, comment, and share with others who appreciate powerful emotional journeys. Your support means everything. The next day, I arrived at the house at exactly 6 o'clock, a bottle of Catherine's favorite wine in hand, a peace offering that felt woefully inadequate. I'd spent the morning canceling my flight to Phoenix, explaining to my friend Mike that my plans had changed. I'd spent the afternoon in a daze, alternating between hope that Catherine might eventually forgive me and certainty that I didn't deserve it. I knocked on the front door of what had once been my home, feeling like a stranger. Nathan answered, dressed casually in jeans and a navy sweater. "Mr. Thornton," he said, his tone neutral. "Catherine's in the dining room." As I stepped inside, the aroma of home cooking enveloped my garlic, herbs, something rich and savory that made my stomach growl embarrassingly. I hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. "It smells wonderful," I said awkwardly, handing him the wine. "Thank you." He examined the label. "Catherine's favorite. You remembered." There was a hint of approval in his voice that bothered me. I didn't want or need this stranger's validation, but I nodded politely and followed him through the house. The dining room had been transformed. The oversized table where we used to host dinner parties had been replaced by a smaller one, positioned perfectly for Catherine's wheelchair. The china cabinet remained, but it had been rearranged, with items Catherine could reach placed on lower shelves. The room felt both familiar and alien, a space designed around her needs in ways I had never managed. Catherine sat at the table, wearing a deep green blouse that brought out the flecks of emerald in her hazel eyes. Her hair was twisted into a simple updo, and she wore light makeup, nothing dramatic, just enough to bring color to her face. She looked more like herself than she had in years. "Hello, Jack," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for coming." I stood awkwardly, unsure where to sit, until Nathan gestured to a chair across from Catherine. "I'll bring out dinner in a few minutes," he said, disappearing into the kitchen. Alone with Catherine, I searched for something to say. "You look beautiful," I finally managed, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Amazing what a shower, clean clothes, and proper medication can do. The barb stung, but I accepted it without protest. "Catherine, about yesterday." "Let's not start there," she interrupted. "Not yet. Tell me about your plans now that you're staying in town." "I don't have any," I admitted. "I've rented the motel room for another week. After that, I don't know. Look for an apartment, I guess. Try to find a job. I'd been a financial advisor before Catherine's illness had consumed my life, but 3 years away from the industry had left my skills outdated, my client list dissolved." "You could stay in the guest house," Catherine said, the suggestion so unexpected I nearly choked on the water I'd been sipping. "What?" "The guest house at the back of the property." She gestured vaguely toward the backyard. "It's part of the property Nathan purchased, but he's not using it. It needs work, but it's better than a motel." I stared at her, trying to understand. "You want me to live in the backyard?" "I want you to be close enough that you can't run away again," she clarified. "And I want you to help with some things Nathan can't do alone." Before I could respond, Nathan returned with 3 plates balanced expertly on his arms, the kind of service move I'd seen from experienced waitstaff. He set them down with practiced ease. "Coq au vin," he announced. "One of the few French dishes I can make properly." The plate before me held tender chicken in a rich wine sauce, nestled beside roasted vegetables and crusty bread. It looked restaurant quality. "You cook?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. "I'm a man of many talents," Nathan replied with a modest shrug. "When you live alone as long as I have, you either learn to cook or resign yourself to take out forever." "Nathan was a chef before he became a nurse," Catherine added. "He worked in restaurants to put himself through nursing school." The easy familiarity between them made my chest tighten with something between jealousy and shame. Catherine had learned more about this man in 4 days than I'd bothered to learn about her doctors in 4 years. "It's delicious," I said after taking a bite, the flavors exploding on my tongue. When had I last eaten anything that wasn't fast food or microwaved? We ate in strained silence for a few minutes before Catherine spoke again. "Jack, there's something you should know, something important." The seriousness in her tone made me set down my fork. "What is it?" She glanced at Nathan, who nodded encouragingly. "Dr. Liu has been reviewing my medical records. She believes I've been significantly over-medicated for at least the past 2 years. Possibly intentionally." "What do you mean, intentionally?" I asked, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. Nathan leaned forward. "Dr. Melton has been under investigation by the medical board for some time. There are concerns about his relationship with certain pharmaceutical companies and his prescription patterns." "Are you saying he was giving Catherine drugs she didn't need?" "Not just that," Catherine said quietly. "He was prescribing medications that were actively making me worse, drugs that increased my fatigue, my cognitive issues, my dependence." I shook my head, unable to process what I was hearing. "That can't be right. He's one of the most respected neurologists in the state. Why would he do that?" "Money," Nathan said simply. "Insurance fraud, pharmaceutical kickbacks. It's more common than you'd think." "How do you know all this?" I demanded, anger rising to replace my confusion. Nathan set down his wine glass carefully. "This isn't the first time I've encountered Dr. Melton's handiwork, Mr. Thornton. I've been tracking his cases for several years." "What? Did you think I just randomly decided to buy houses with sick residents included?" Nathan's eyes hardened slightly. "I target specific case patients under Melton's care who show signs of unnecessary medical decline." The room seemed to tilt around me. "You're saying you bought this house, took on Catherine's care because of Dr. Melton?" "Initially, yes," Nathan admitted. "When your house came on the market with the unusual care provision, I recognized Melton's name on the medical power of attorney documents. I've been building a case against him for years." "Building a case?" I repeated, struggling to follow. "Who are you?" "I'm exactly what I told your real estate agenta registered nurse who inherited money and believes in allowing people to age or convalesce in their own homes." He paused. "I'm also a former patient of Edward Melton, one who nearly died from his aggressive treatment protocols 7 years ago." Catherine reached across the table and squeezed Nathan's hand briefly, a gesture of support that sent another pang through me. "What Nathan isn't telling you," she continued, "is that after he recovered, he went to nursing school specifically to help other patients like himself. He's been working with patient advocacy groups and even the FBI to gather evidence against doctors like Melton." "The FBI?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "There's an ongoing investigation," Nathan confirmed. "Insurance fraud across state lines makes it a federal case." I pushed back from the table, my appetite gone. "Let me understand this. You're saying that Dr. Melton's doctor I trusted with Catherine's care for 4 years was deliberately over-medicating her for profit, and you?" I pointed at Nathan. "Bought our house as part of some vigilante crusade against corrupt doctors?" That's simplifying things, but essentially correct, Nathan said calmly. I turned to Catherine. And you believe all this? I've seen the evidence, Jack, and more importantly, I've felt the difference. She pushed her wheelchair back from the table slightly. Watch. To my astonishment, Catherine placed her hands on the armrests of her wheelchair and pushed herself up to standing. She wavered for a moment but remained upright, holding the table's edge for support. 47 seconds yesterday, she said, her voice strained but triumphant. Let's see if I can beat that. I stared, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Catherine hadn't stood unassisted in over a year. Dr. Melton had told us her leg muscle deterioration was irreversible, that the best we could hope for was maintaining her upper body strength. How is this possible? I whispered. Dr. Liu believes much of my decline was medication, induced, Catherine said, carefully lowering herself back into her chair after nearly a minute of standing. She's cut my prescriptions from 14 down to 5, and my strength is already returning. My mind reeled. If what they were saying was true, then Catherine had been suffering needlessly for years. And I, her husband, her advocate, had failed to question her treatment, had accepted everything Dr. Melton told us as gospel. There's more, Nathan said, his tone gentler now. Yesterday, while clearing space in the attic for some medical equipment, I found something interesting. He left the room briefly and returned with a dusty folder I recognized immediately, my father's old document case. These were in a box labeled Dad's Stuff, Nathan said, placing the folder on the table. I thought you should see them. With shaking hands, I opened the folder. Inside were stock certificates, the shares in some tech startup my father had given me years ago, telling me they might be worth something someday. I'd stashed them away and forgotten about them after his death. Do you know what these are? Nathan asked. I nodded. My father's old tech investments. He gave them to me maybe 10 years ago. I assumed they were worthless. They're Quantum Nexus shares, Nathan said. The company went public last year. These certificates are worth approximately $2.3 million. The room spun around me. That can't be right. I verified it this morning, Nathan said. The shares have split twice since the original purchase. Your father invested early in what became one of the leading quantum computing companies in the world. I looked at Catherine, whose expression was unreadable. All this time, I said hoarsely, we had the money to pay for your care, to hire help, to get second opinions, and I never even checked. No, she agreed quietly. You didn't. The full weight of my failure crashed down on me. Not only had I abandoned my sick wife, but I'd done so when the solution to our financial problems had been gathering dust in our attic all along. If I'd been more thorough, less overwhelmed, I might have found those certificates. Catherine might have received better care. We might still be together. I don't know what to say, I managed finally, except that I failed you in ways I'm only beginning to understand. Catherine studied me for a long moment. Yes, you did, but that's not the most important thing right now. What matters is what happens next. What do you mean? Dr. Liu is preparing a formal complaint against Dr. Melton, Nathan explained. The FBI already has substantial evidence, but they need testimony from his patients and their families. They need my testimony, I realized. Nathan nodded. As Catherine's primary caregiver for 4 years, your observations would be invaluable. Your financial records showing the escalating costs of her treatments, your notes about her declining condition, all of it, helps establish the pattern. The implications were clear. By agreeing to testify, I would have to publicly admit that I had failed to protect my wife, that I had been duped by a corrupt doctor, that I had abandoned her at her most vulnerable. The humiliation would be complete. But I would also be helping to bring justice to the man who had contributed to Catherine's suffering, perhaps even caused much of it. "Of course I'll testify," I said without hesitation. "Whatever they need." Something flickered in Catherine's eyes, not forgiveness, but perhaps a glimmer of respect. "There's something else you should know," she said after a moment. "Doctor, Lou believes I might be a candidate for her clinical trial, a new combination therapy for MS patients who've been improperly treated. If it works, I could regain significant function." Hope bloomed in my chest. "That's wonderful, Kat." "It's not a cure," she cautioned. "Mist doesn't go away, but it could give me back some of what was taken, not just by the disease, but by Melton's treatments." I nodded, trying to absorb everything I'd learned. My wife might walk again. We had millions sitting in an old folder. The doctor I'd trusted had been poisoning her for profit. And the stranger who now owned our house was actually her savior. It was too much. I pushed back from the table and stood. "I need some air." "The back patio is still there," Catherine said with a hint of her old dry humor. "Some things haven't changed." I stepped outside into the cool evening air, my thoughts in chaos. The backyard looked different. The flower beds Catherine had once lovingly tended were neat again, though with different plants than she would have chosen. The old wooden swing where we used to sit on summer evenings had been replaced by a more accessible bench with armrests. And there, at the back of the property, was the guest house, a small cottage we'd once talked about renovating as a space for her aging parents before they'd both died in a car accident 6 years ago. It had stood empty since then, used mainly for storage. Catherine was offering me a place to stay, not in our home, not in her life, but close enough to prevent me from running away again, close enough to face the consequences of my actions daily. It was both mercy and punishment. I heard the door open behind me and turned to see Nathan stepping onto the patio. "She's resting," he said, answering my unasked question. "The standing exercises take a lot out of her." I nodded, unsure what to say to this man who had done for my wife what I should have done. "I don't blame you, you know," he said after a moment, "for not seeing what Melton was doing." "You should," I replied bitterly. "I was her husband." "You were also his victim." Nathan's voice was matter-of-fact. "Melton's brilliance was in isolating his patients from effective support systems. He pushed caregivers to the breaking point, deliberately recommending unnecessarily complex home care regimens, prescribing medications with conflicting administration schedules, creating crises that required constant vigilance." "Why would he do that?" "Because exhausted, desperate caregivers don't ask questions," Nathan said simply. "They don't seek second opinions. They don't notice when their loved ones get worse instead of better after starting a new medication. They're too busy surviving." His words offered an explanation, but not an excuse. Nothing could excuse what I'd done. "The guest house needs work," Nathan continued, changing the subject. "New plumbing, some electrical updates, but the structure is sound." I looked at him, confused by this shift. "Are you seriously offering me a place to stay?" "Catherine is," he corrected. "I'm just not opposing it. She believes having you nearby is important for her recovery, both physical and emotional." "And what do you believe?" Nathan considered the question. "I believe Catherine deserves whatever support she needs to heal. If that includes having her estranged husband living in the guest house while she processes his betrayal, so be it." His bluntness was refreshing after years of doctors' euphemisms and my own self-deceptions. "Why are you doing all this?" I asked. "Not just for Catherine, for all of Melton's patients. You could have moved on with your life after you recovered." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "My wife didn't." "Your wife?" "Melton was her doctor too," he said, his voice suddenly rough with emotion. "She didn't survive his aggressive treatment protocol. By the time I understood what was happening, it was too late for her, but it's not too late for others." The pieces fell into place. This wasn't just a crusade, it was a mission born of personal tragedy. Nathan wasn't just Catherine's rescuer, he was a widower channeling his grief into purpose. "I'm sorry," I said inadequately. He nodded once, acknowledging but not inviting further discussion. "There's a cot in the guest house, sheets in the hall closet. The plumbing works well enough for now, though the hot water is temperamental. If you decide to stay, we can discuss renovations tomorrow." The offer hung between us practical, unsentimental, but genuine. "Why would you help me after what I've done?" I asked. "I'm not helping you," Nathan clarified. "I'm helping Catherine. She believes that understanding why you left is part of her healing process. And frankly, your testimony against Melton will be stronger if you're not living in a motel, looking like a man who abandoned his wife." His assessment was brutally honest but correct. My credibility would matter when it came time to testify. "One condition," he added. "You contribute to the household expenses from the stock proceeds once they're liquidated. Not because we need the money, but because you need to have skin in the game. No more running away." I nodded, relieved to have some form of penance, some way to contribute. Agreed. "And you should know," Nathan continued, "that the FBI will probably want to interview you tomorrow. I've scheduled a meeting with Agent Marcos here at 10 a.m. My head snapped up. "You've already contacted them about me?" "They contacted me," he corrected. "They've been monitoring Melton's patients, including Catherine. When they learned her husband had suddenly sold their house and disappeared, they became very interested in speaking with you." A chill ran through me. "Do they think I was involved in Melton's scheme?" "No. They think you might be another victimone who broke under the strain Melton deliberately created." He paused. "Was his office manager, Diane Winters, involved in your financial arrangements? The payment plans, the special billing for treatments not covered by insurance?" I nodded slowly, remembering the sympathetic woman who had helped me set up payment plans, who had suggested the second mortgage when the bills became overwhelming. She handled everything. She said she was finding ways to help us manage the costs. "Diane Winters is Melton's sister-in-law," Nathan said. "She's been helping him target vulnerable patients for years. The financial pressure was part of their strategy keep. The caregivers focused on money problems so they don't notice the medical ones." My mind reeled with this new information. Had we been targeted? Had Melton seen in Catherine use an opportunity for exploitation from the beginning? "I feel like such a fool," I said quietly. "You were a man drowning while trying to save someone else," Nathan replied. "Melton and his accomplices were the ones holding you both underwater. He checked his watch." "It's getting late. Catherine needs her evening medication soon. Will you stay in the guest house tonight?" The question was practical, not emotional. This wasn't about reconciliation or forgiveness. It was about logistics, about keeping me available for the FBI interview, about Catherine's healing process. "Yes," I said. "If Catherine is sure." "She suggested it," Nathan reminded me. "She's nothing if not sure of her own mind." A small smile touched his lips' admiration, not romance, but it still sent a pang through me to see someone else appreciating my wife's strength, in ways I had failed to do. As I followed him back into the house, I caught sight of Catherine through the living room doorway. She was in her wheelchair, doing some kind of upper body exercise with resistance bands, her face set in concentration. She looked up as we entered, her eyes meeting mine with a complexity of emotion I couldn't fully read. "I'll stay in the guest house," I told her. "If that's still okay with you." She nodded once. "It's better than you disappearing again, and the FBI will want you close." "Nathan told me about the meeting tomorrow." "Good." She set down the resistance bands. "You should know that I've already given them a statement. I told them everything, Jack. How you struggled, how you broke, how you left." I swallowed hard. "I understand." "Do you?" She wheeled herself closer. "Because I need you to be prepared. This isn't going to be easy or private. When they build their case against Melton, our story will become evidence. People will know what you did." The public humiliation I'd feared was inevitable now. Everyone would know I had abandoned my sick wife, sold her essentially, along with our home. My reputation would be destroyed. But something else might be saved. "I'll tell them everything," I promised, "no matter what it costs me." Something shifted in Catherine's expression, not softening exactly, but a recognition of resolve that mirrored her own. "Nathan says the guest house needs work," she said, changing the subject. "I can handle it. I'll start tomorrow after the FBI meeting." She nodded. "There's one more thing you should know. Dr. Liu is bringing a camera crew next week, a documentary team from PBS. They're doing a series on medical fraud." My heart sank further. Not just legal proceedings, but public exposure on national television. "I see." "They want to interview both of us," Catherine continued. "The doctor who betrayed his patients and the husband who abandoned his wife make for a compelling narrative, apparently." The bitterness in her voice cut through me. "You don't have to do it, Kat." "Actually, I do," she said firmly, "because my story might help other patients recognize what's happening to them before it's too late, before their husbands sell them with the family home. I deserve that. I deserved all of it." "I'll do whatever you want me to do," I said quietly. "Whatever helps you heal." Catherine looked at me for a long moment. "You know what the strangest part of all this is? If you hadn't abandoned if you hadn't sold our house to Nathan, might never have discovered the truth about Melton. I might have continued declining until there was nothing left of me." She shook her head slightly. "Your worst act might have accidentally saved my life." The irony was both bitter and sweet. In betraying her, I had unwittingly connected her with the people who could actually help her. My failure had become the catalyst for her potential recovery. "I don't deserve credit for that," I said. "It was luck, not intention." "I know." Her voice was steady. "But it happened all the same. And now we both have to figure out what comes next." Next. The word held possibilities I hadn't dared to consider. Not reconciliation, too much had been broken for that, but perhaps something else. A new kind of relationship built on harsh truths instead of desperate denial. A chance to atone, to support Catherine's fight against Melton, to face the consequences of my actions with the same courage she was showing in the face of her disease. "I'll be here," I said simply, "for as long as you need me to be." It wasn't a grand promise of eternal love. It wasn't a desperate plea for forgiveness. It was a commitment to stay present, to stop running, to bear witness to whatever came next: Catherine's recovery, Melton's prosecution, my own public reckoning. "Good," she said, "because this is just the beginning." As Nathan returned with Catherine's evening medication, I sensed the truth of her words. This was just the beginning of a story. None of us could have anticipated a story of betrayal and unexpected redemption, of corruption exposed and justice pursued, of broken trust and the slow, painful possibility of rebuilding not what was lost, but something entirely new from the ruins. I walked toward the guest house as night fell, carrying nothing but the clothes on my back and the weight of all I had done and failed to do. Tomorrow would bring the FBI, questions I didn't want to answer, truths I didn't want to face. Next week would bring cameras, public exposure, judgment. But it would also bring another day of Catherine standing for a few seconds longer, another piece of evidence against the doctor who had harmed her. Another small step toward whatever future awaited us on the other side of this chaos. It wasn't hope or not exactly, but it was purpose, and for now, that would have to be enough. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and share. Your support helps bring more powerful stories like this to life. Re-intenter B.